The conflict between Iran and Israel erupted into open warfare on June 13, 2025, when Israel launched a large-scale airstrike campaign deep inside Iranian territory. The strikes targeted nuclear facilities in Natanz, Iraq, and Fordo, as well as command centers of the Revolutionary Guard Corps. Israel claimed these were preemptive strikes to prevent Iran from advancing its suspected nuclear weapons program. Days before the attack, Israeli intelligence had deployed drones to disable Iran's air defense systems, clearing the way for fighter jets to strike with minimal resistance. Iran responded the same day with Operation True Promise 3, launching a wave of ballistic missiles and drones toward Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Beersheba. The retaliation was one of the most intense direct military responses in the region's history. By June 16th, several Israeli cities had suffered damage, with at least 5 civilians killed and many more injured. On June 19th, one of Iran's missiles struck the Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, causing extensive damage and prompting a partial evacuation due to fears of chemical contamination. Within 48 hours, Israel launched a second wave of attacks. More than 60 fighter jets dropped over 100 precision-guided bombs on Iranian military infrastructure. This included the heavy water reactor at Iraq, advanced centrifuge installations in Natanz, and missile production facilities. Reports from Iranian media suggest that over 600 people were killed in these strikes, including high-ranking members of the IRGC and nuclear scientists. Amid escalating violence, Iran's foreign minister traveled to Geneva on June 20th to engage in emergency talks with European diplomats. Iran condemned the Israeli attacks as violations of international law and pushed for an immediate ceasefire. However, Iranian leaders made clear that they would not negotiate unless Israel halted its aggression. Meanwhile, protests supporting Iran and denouncing Israeli airstrikes erupted in cities across the Middle East and Europe, drawing thousands of demonstrators. Former U.S. President Donald Trump re-entered the global spotlight during the crisis. On June 16th, he proposed a new nuclear agreement for Iran, offering a 60-day deadline to comply. He warned that if Iran refused, the U.S. could assist Israel militarily, including the possible deployment of bunker-buster bombs to destroy deeply buried nuclear facilities. Trump explicitly rejected the idea of a ceasefire, stating that Iran must fully surrender its nuclear capabilities. Trump further claimed that the United States had complete surveillance and cyber control over Iranian airspace. He warned that any future threats to U.S. interests or allies would be met with overwhelming force. These statements intensified concerns among global leaders, with many warning that U.S. involvement could trigger a much broader and more destructive conflict across the region. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu affirmed that Iran would pay for its missile attacks. He declared that Israel would not stop until Iran's nuclear and missile infrastructure was dismantled. In response, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and President Ebrahim Raisi labeled Israel's airstrikes as acts of war and reaffirmed Iran's right to defend its sovereignty and military programs. The ongoing war is already shifting global geopolitics. Oil prices have soared due to fears of disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, a critical maritime passage that handles about 1/3 of the world's oil shipments. Global energy markets are unstable, and countries dependent on Middle Eastern oil are preparing for long-term economic repercussions. Simultaneously, the humanitarian crisis is escalating. In Iran, thousands have fled major cities like Tehran to escape the threat of further airstrikes. In Israel, civilians are living under the constant threat of missile attacks and have been advised to remain in bomb shelters. There is growing concern about the safety of nuclear infrastructure in both nations. Iran's nuclear facilities, though civilian and monitored by international agencies, are now under threat of military attack. Continued airstrikes near these sensitive areas could trigger radiation leaks, raising the possibility of long-term environmental damage. Nuclear watchdog organizations have urged both countries to avoid targeting such sites, warning that any accident could spread radioactive contamination far beyond the region. Environmental groups are calling for an immediate halt to the conflict, emphasizing that damage to a nuclear plant or its surroundings would affect millions across the Middle East. These groups stress that nuclear fallout does not recognize borders and would likely lead to irreversible ecological and human harm. Politically, this conflict is becoming a defining chapter for Donald Trump. His aggressive foreign policy approach and public statements have reignited fierce debate in the United States. Supporters argue that Trump is showing strong leadership, unwilling to compromise on American security. Critics, however, believe that he is dangerously escalating a regional conflict for political purposes. Within the U.S. government, there is division, with the Biden administration choosing a more cautious route, providing intelligence support to Israel, but refraining from direct military engagement. Public opinion worldwide is sharply divided. In many Western countries, mainstream media continues to depict Israel's actions as defensive. However, in large parts of Asia, Africa, and the Arab world, the narrative is shifting. Israel is increasingly viewed as the aggressor, and there is rising condemnation of its military campaign. Massive protests in cities like Baghdad, Karachi, Beirut, and even in Western capitals like London and Paris have expressed solidarity with Iran and demanded a halt to Israeli airstrikes. Social media platforms have become battlegrounds of narrative warfare. Hashtags supporting Iran have trended globally, while online activism has amplified voices accusing Israel of war crimes and civilian targeting. Videos and images from the ground showing destroyed civilian infrastructure in Iran have fueled outrage and mobilized international sympathy. Diplomatic back channels are now in overdrive. Nations like Switzerland, Qatar, Turkey, and Russia are attempting to mediate a ceasefire. While all sides claim to be open to dialogue, their conditions remain irreconcilable. Iran insists that negotiations can only begin once Israeli attacks stop. Israel demands that Iran dismantle its missile programs and halt uranium enrichment before any talks can proceed. With neither side willing to compromise, diplomatic efforts have so far failed to produce results. As of June 20th, the situation remains extremely tense and unpredictable. Iran continues to promise powerful retaliation if attacked again. Israeli military leadership has hinted at launching a more aggressive second wave, possibly targeting Iran's remaining nuclear infrastructure and defense installations. Both countries appear determined not to show weakness, and each escalation increases the risk of a wider war involving more regional powers. The stakes are high. A broader Middle Eastern conflict could pull in Lebanon's Hezbollah, Iraq's militias, and even Gulf states. It would almost certainly involve the United States in some capacity and destabilize oil markets for months, if not years. Humanitarian agencies are warning of massive refugee flows and potential famine in areas cut off from basic supplies due to bombing and blockades. The future of this war remains uncertain. The international community is watching anxiously, but pressure alone may not be enough to prevent the situation from spiraling further. With each passing day, the possibility of diplomacy diminishes and the risk of total war grows. It is a moment that could reshape not only the Middle East, but the global order for years to come. Subscribe to the channel for more updates regarding to the world current affairs.